Welcome to Next in Queue, the podcast for contact center and customer experience professionals. Next in Queue is brought to you by Happy 2 Vision. Eliminate blind spots and see right through every conversation with Happy 2 Vision. Learn more at ajppitu.com. Now, here's your host, Rob Dwyer.
Welcome, everyone. My name is Rob Dwyer, and I have a very special guest today who I've been trying to get on the show for quite some time, and we've been dealing with crazy schedules and a little bit of illness, but I am honored to have Marion Balandra on the show with me today. Welcome, Marion. How are you?
That was a nice introduction. Thank you, Rob. I'm well. As you know, you've mentioned, my voice isn't still quite there yet, but has been eager to speak with you. We've been kind of following each other's content on LinkedIn. Definitely such a huge fan of, the content that you're putting out there. So I'm, delighted to be here. Thank you.
Well, thank you for taking the time to join. I know that you have a busy schedule, and I think the last time we talked, you were in Boston. Now you're in New York. The time before that, you were actually overseas. So we'll talk a little bit about that just to give everyone an idea of who you are. You're the CEO of Star Mars Tech and Meridian Remote Teams. And so we'll talk about those in a little bit. But I actually want to go back in time with you a little bit.
Sure.
So you and I, we went to college around roughly the same time, although in very different places. So you went to San Francisco State. You studied accounting and computer science. And there's this thing about accounting that has this perception, we'll just call it fair or not fair. What made you want to study accounting?
It actually stems from, I'm Filipino and Spanish. My dad's family, my dad is Filipino, is predominantly in the medical field. My grandfather was a doctor. My dad was a pre-med graduate. Most of my aunts and uncles are, either doctors or nurses. And, when I was in my junior year in high school, thinking about what course, you have that conversation with your parents of like, have you thought about what you want to do in college or what you want to take up? And, obviously the first obvious choice for my dad was like, so are you going to go into the medical field? And, my answer was like, nope. Number one, I said, I get squeamish with, bodily fluids, and I don't think I could do the cadavers. I'm really huge, baby when it comes to, I love historic war movies, but I'm the girl that's like covering my eyes every second because I don't like to see violence and gore. Right. So I said, honestly, I said, I want to be a lawyer. I've always had kind of, this warrior advocate's heart, and so I always wanted to be able to like make a difference. So I said, what about law? And my dad almost like pretended like he didn't hear me. He's like, you know what? He's like, you're great with numbers. He's like, you're great in math and science. He's like, have you thought about accounting? And of course, being a junior in high school, I was like, what's that? He's like, oh, it's very easy. He's like, it's just plus and minuses, and you're going to be great at it. I said, well, do you see a path from that going towards law? Can I be a lawyer taking up that course in college? And he's like, absolutely. You could be a CPA lawyer. And of course, not knowing what it is, is just trusting, your parents. I went for it. So I signed up with San Francisco State. I'm the oldest of three girls, and my dad and my mom, my dad's from the military, my mom's a teacher, grew up in a sheltered life. And so being the firstborn, not wanting me to be away from the family, I had to choose within, the San Francisco Bay Area choice of school. So I chose San Francisco State. My first year of accounting was really painful. Was painful in the sense of like, I didn't find joy in it. It was just too repetitive for me. I couldn't imagine doing that for years, but being the good daughter that I've been raised to be, you have to finish it. So that's where the whole minor in CIS, computer information systems, came in, because talking with my peers at this time, I've already gotten acquainted with a campus and joined some clubs. I joined like a Filipino American collegiate endeavor, which is called PACE. It's an institution in San Francisco. And, hearing from my peers, they said, well, everybody's taking up like technology, computers, like have a look at, and so I got to sit down with a few of them, and they're like, yeah, you kind of have a badass attitude. And because they always know me as the girl, the AV girl that always gets the, at that time, the projectors working, or if the computer that's not, for some reason, I'm the only one that's able to like make it work. They're like, you should be a good tech person. You should go into tech, so that's how that kind of came about. And accounting was something that I had dedicated myself, as far as like my commitment to my parents, just like a normal, obedient Filipino girl would do. And finished it off after 4 years, but never really looked back. So yeah, that's kind of where that came from.
That's a fantastic story. I'm wondering, because I took a lot of computer science courses when I was at the University of Kansas, and we went to school about the same time.
96.
Was it?
Well, I graduated high school in 96, meaning because, in our generation, whatever year you graduate high school kind of defines age group you're at.
Yeah, I was a couple years earlier, but it's pretty close.
Yeah.
Was it dominated by males in those classes that you were in?
Absolutely. And that was almost very characteristic of me. Like I'm usually very effeminate, but when it comes to just doing things, I was always hardcore. Like I was the girl who knew how to change my oil, and this transitioned into my life later on till this day. Like most of my friends are, males. I affiliate and assimilate with them a lot easier than I do with, my women who I adore. But I think it's just some certain characteristics. A lot of it probably has to do with my dad being in the military and being the oldest of 3 girls, and my dad raising me as if he would never raise a son, So I was the one that had, target practice shooting at the age of 7, drove fairly, early. So yeah, I mean, it was definitely a male dominated part of college during that time in college. I could probably only pinpoint maybe between myself and a class of about 60. There's probably only 3 to 4 girls that I could recall seeing in my class.
Yeah, that sounds about right. I imagine, I know that things have changed a little bit, but I imagine that mirrors a little bit what you are seeing in the business world, particularly in tech, because it's still very much a male dominated field. So what's it like for you to be a woman and going to these conferences and speaking and trying to win new business and all of that kind of stuff?
It is, as a woman, there's one thing to go through the challenges as a woman. It's another level to go through those same challenges as a mother, right?
Yeah.
When I first started in business and making my way through, obviously it's a male dominated, industry. You deal with a lot of, even with the background that I have. And, my first job was actually working as a technical assistant. It's a way of basically assisting, the director of IT for this company or this bank that I was working for as one of my first jobs. Regardless of what the background was, it's like people saw me for who they saw standing in front of them, right? So it's the face. It's this tiny, 5'1" Filipino girl that's just a little chatterbox. And then when I tell them who I am, what my credentials are, that I run a tech company, I kind of get the brow in the beginning. And this was when Marion Balandra was, nobody in the Bay Area, or in this tech space, the startup tech space, from Silicon Valley. There's a lot to prove, right? For me, it's being a woman, it's being a woman of a minority, and then later on being a mother of, they ask, and, my mid 30s and now into my early 40s, who's watching the kids?
Yeah.
There's a level of, let me talk to who's in charge, attitude that I kind of come across when I, so confidently try to approach somebody and like sell them a pitch or try to like build rapport. And again, even if I tell them, oh, I know I run my own company, there's kind of like this brow raising of like, let me get to know you even more, which I actually love and I take as a challenge, because instead of kind of just taking me on like a first impression basis, it gives them an opportunity to get to know my heart. And, that's my superpower. I've been speaking in a lot of like women in tech conferences over the past 2 years. I'd have to say, I think 2020 was the year of the women in tech. This is where you see all of these huge, numbers of women in tech actually quitting from their jobs and starting their own startups.
Yeah.
I think we were discussing that in one of our my panel discussions, where 2020 you've seen like this huge spike, and movement towards that. So there's definitely a huge change, but there's a lot of work that still has to be done, because it's not just us here in the United States. I travel all the way to Asia, because now I run, Marion remote teams in the Philippines, and then we've opened an office under Star Mars in Sharjah and the UAE. And, my travels through Europe for a lot of conferences like Web Summit, Collision. I've just been asked to speak in this whole new remote innovative conference in Montreal on the 16th through the 20th of May. And so, what I find is that I'm still kind of getting that feel of like, anytime I come across anybody, it doesn't matter if it's male or female. If I come with this persona and I share with them what my background is, it's almost like, a lot of prying questions after, which I'm dealing with, and I'm super comfortable with, because, at the end of the day, I know who I am. I know where my heart sits. And, again, it's just a great way to kind of, build a better, stronger relationship or connection with whoever it is I'm speaking with. It gives me an opportunity to share a little bit more about myself and, what my purpose is.
Yeah. So let's talk about, because it's been a decade now that you've been running Star Mars Tech.
Yes.
But I want to talk about my favorite part, which is the logo. So tell me about where the name and the logo came from with Star Mars.
Yeah, so I'm a huge Star Wars junkie. That's what it is. That's why I remember when we first spoke, I saw your R2D2 figure in the back, and I was like, this is my people right here. And I'm just like, this is why I knew Rob, even without seeing him. There's just the energy through LinkedIn messaging. You could already sense that instant connection, right? So I was a huge Star Wars fan way before I even started having children. Of course, because I have an older girl and two boys. And we're the Mar family. I'm a single mom now, but my ex-husband, they were all MAR, and then my name's Marion. My only daughter's name is Marion, and then we have a Marlon Jr., and then we have Martin. So MAR family, right? And so when I was formulating what should we name it, at that time it was really more, when I started Star Mars, it was really more of like consulting before we even got into deep tech. And so I just needed to figure out something. And I was like, you know what? I love Star Wars, and, we're the Mars family. So I'm going to say Star Mars. Until this day, we've rebranded maybe 2 times. Until this day, I've had questions asked like, okay, where does Star Mars come from? And I tell this funny story because it's so innocent, but it's the truth, and they kind of look at me, and, it's a good icebreaker, if anything. But it's just kind of stuck. So that's kind of where that came from.
Oh, that's fantastic. So it's interesting to me because the same thing has happened in my family and my extended family when you have children's names. Often it's the first letter, but you've actually got the first 3 letters that are repeated for all of them. That's very interesting.
Yeah. So that is also very Filipino. It's in the Philippines. That's why we have the Mariteses and the Marijon, and because what they do is like, or a Marvic, right? Well, their parents' name would be Marie, and the dad's name would be, or the mom's name would be Marie, and the dad's name would be Victor. So that's how you have Marvic, right? So fortunately for me, that I wasn't, part of that. But I think just from the cultural influences, growing up, there's a little bit about, paying homage to my children. So, and yes, you're right. I kind of took it far.
That's great, though. It's great. I think it makes for an interesting story when you're talking about your siblings and they all have, names that are very close to yours. So the kids will either love it or hate it at some point, probably both at times.
That's good.
So in 2020, you started, correct me if I'm wrong, that's when you started Meridian Remote Teams.
Yeah.
Tell me about the genesis of that and how did that come about?
That is my life story. I think, 2020 is actually when my life began. When I say began, it's when I was able to discover my strengths, my purpose, and what my main direction in life would be. So I've been running Star Mars for a good, about 5 years or so. And I stumbled across this concept of outsourcing. As we've gotten a lot more tech projects, there's a huge need for outsourcing in, the startup space, because it's ideal. You get a cheap, expense on building your team as you scale. It's ideal, and it's, offshore, but it's with a group of people who are fairly great in expressing themselves communication wise in English. And the culture is fairly similar to American culture. So in the Philippines, I found an outsourcing partner at that time. And in true fashion, anything that I take on, I just take to heart. And so I flew to the Philippines, got to know the team, even though this was my partner's company, and just immersed myself. It's a little bit personal story, but it's the truth. So I always share it. But at this time, I was already at the brink of a separation in my marriage. And, just wanting to fully immerse myself into something that I felt passionate about, and getting to know my people and giving back, and realizing that as a Filipino American who was born in the Philippines and then moved when I was way younger to the Bay Area and really settled there and built a career for herself, going back to the Philippines was a completely different dynamic where I come across Filipinos and I engage with them because I know we're connected, and they look at me like this foreign entity, and I speak to them in the language because I still, speak Tagalog and the native dialect, which is Kapampangan, and their eyes just light up, and there's this newfound source of inspiration that they drew from me. And, I got to know more about their lives, how that whole outsourcing industry worked in the Philippines. And, fortunately, but unfortunately, I found a lot of cracks. I found a lot of sad stories of you have people who dedicate their lives working this rat wheel, of a 9 to 5, barely getting paid anything, not much benefits, with, very poor style leadership. It needed a lot of revamping. And so, as a woman, partner, from the US team, I've shared with my partners the frustration of what I felt needed to change back in the Philippines for their company. Needless to say, I wasn't successful. I think a lot of it had to do with being a woman, going back to that, right? Who is this, Filipino woman trying to tell us how to run our outsourcing center in the Philippines. And then I ended up because at that time I was attending a lot of conferences and representing them because they were our outsourcing entity. I actually ended up in Davos 2020 with, a really good friend of mine who I met in Malta. His name is Mamadou, who runs Ubuntu Tribe. And we launched the first Africa Night. And it was the first time that I felt like I knew exactly what it needed to happen at that point. I felt a family, build around me during Davos week just this is during the World Economic Forum in 2020, met so many amazing connections. And as I left Davos, flying into Dusseldorf and then Paris later on, and then London, I had a one-on-one with my CEO partner. And that was when I said, I think it's time for me to sever ties. I think it's time for me to, let go of my role as a partner and go on my own path, because I felt like my efforts within that entity have failed. It was like a heartbreak. Funny enough, I don't remember feeling as devastated leaving my marriage as I did leaving that partnership. And I knew at that instant that this was it. And so after Davos, I cried my heart out, by the way, in London when I had said this. After that Zoom call ended, I was meeting, I think, like a global head of customer success for Gainsight, Dan, at that time. And he calls me, he's like, Marion, I'm downstairs. I pick up the phone, like, and he's like, oh my gosh, are you okay? I'm like, well, no, I just quit my partnership and I'm devastated, but I can still meet you, So I kind of shared with him this whole journey of like what I was going against and what I really wanted to do and how I wanted to instill change, and not knowing how to do that at one point, and he gave me some really good, advice. He was a really great sage. He and I are like great friends till today. And then from there, I flew directly to the Philippines, because Davos was end of January and end of February was my birthday. So I felt, I'm going to spend my birthday in the Philippines with this, they were called ninjas, this group of people who I have fallen in love with the past year or two, and just kind of pick up their brain, and maybe they can give me ideas on like, what the next chapter of my life would look like and how I can instill change. And in that birthday party, there were about 50 of them who attended from that previous company. And I found out because I didn't know that the CEO had announced that I already severed the partnership. And so everybody in the Philippines knew I was quitting. We were still in good terms about it. They know I was celebrating my birthday. But at my birthday party, they announced that they had quit. And they're like, we're going to join you, Miss Marion. I'm like, join me in what? What are we going to do? And they're like, no, we're going to start this, and and I was just like, you've got to be kidding me. And then I went back and COVID hit, and I thought about it, and COVID gave me an opportunity to be like, you know what? Let's just jump off. Let's do it. So, I know first and foremost, before COVID even happening, I wanted to focus on the women who weren't allowed to work remote, because that was the biggest problem, this huge stigma in the Philippines that, oh, you can't trust, the workers to work remote because they get spoiled and they think they work remote, then they try to cheat the system. This is an example of like very toxic Filipino leadership, of like, no, let me just micromanage you to the T and make sure you don't breathe until I tell you you can breathe, And so to me, it's like, what a wonderful opportunity during COVID now, to be able to provide remote work for women who are single mothers like myself, who, need a balance of family life, yet at the same time have to provide for that same family. And so I built the model for Meridian there. And, I remember the first woman I actually employed through Marion is a 61-year-old grandmother, single grandmother. She was also half American. She's, her father was American, her mom was Filipina. But she has been forever working for the Department of Tourism, I think for over 30 years. And then because of the pandemic, they laid her off. So she saw one of my ads on Facebook and she contacted me directly. And I said, I need you. And she's like, are you serious? She's like, I could still qualify for like an outsourcing job, which is over there in the Philippines, because you deal with computers, it's remote. So it's considered a tech job. And I said, absolutely, I'll train you. We'll train you. And then hold your hand until you're ready to go. Until this day, about 2.5 years later, she's still with us. Actually, I was on a Zoom with her yesterday. And she was talking about, she's like, Marion, you still remember when we got together the first time? I said, yes, I do, moms. And I call her moms because everybody in the company calls her moms. But, it's stories like hers that fill my heart and fill, that purpose that I'm trying to fulfill in the Philippines. Meridian has kind of been my heart project. That's why we have the hearts in the back as our logo. So that's kind of the long and short of what.
There's so much going on there. Like, I just hear this passion that you have, and there's a lot that speaks to your leadership and people wanting to follow you and just say, like, no, we're here and we're going to start this. And it's almost like you didn't have a choice, but in that, right, you were able to create something that filled your heart with joy, gave you a purpose, and gave them a purpose. And I love hearing about people who are able to fill a gap. And that gap, I think, is not just a gap in the business world, right? There are lots of gaps in the business world, right? But it feels like you filled a gap somewhere in here.
Oh, well, I mean, that's the point, right? There, through the last 2.5 years of seeing, we've experienced a huge growth, like I think 800%, like our first 4 or 5 months, and it's still kind of like growing, right? But the purpose has never really, or the focus has never really been, profit or numbers. It is always just being about how many lives are we affecting? How many lives are we changing? And I get this whole sense of like this hero coming, to the Philippines. And I always tell my people, I said, you know what? The reality of it is there's a lot of guilt affixed to it. Let me tell you why. I said, I took on that challenge because my heart was broken. And call it escapism, call it finding my purpose, but there was a void that needed to be filled. And when I came across, you guys, it was almost immediate. Like, I didn't, no questions asked. When you guys asked for my help, it was almost like this was the next thing to do. This was the right thing to do. And so the guilt comes from, am I really helping these people because I know in my heart I do it because it makes me feel good, or, and I just recently had this question, a discussion with my friend Christoph in Dubai about it, where, there are certain individuals whose purpose in life is really to heal. And as much as, I feel like I'm healing them through improving their lives, they're actually in turn healing me. So, and I tell a lot of people, because, the whole thing of like being a CEO and traveling the world and, having a great mission sounds like it's a dream and like I'm living the life, but, everybody has voids in their hearts that need filling at some point. We all come from a lot of traumas throughout our lives that we hold on to. And, part of growing as an individual is, embracing that trauma and understanding the root and understanding how to improve upon it. And so I always say, it sounds very glamorous and it sounds like it's a great thing, but really, no great thing stems from, milk and honey. You know what I mean? It's just,
yeah.
You put together a group of individuals who come from so much pain. And usually what grows out of that is something beautiful. And I'd like to believe that's kind of how Meridian came about.
I love that. Yeah. Building something great is hard work, right? Oh, it's hard work.
This is why I got sick last week, is like all my friends calling from across, they're like, Marion, you need to stop. And even my teammates, and we call each other teammates in the Philippines, Miss Marion, please stop. You need to rest and take care of it, because they know I just go back to back to back. But you know what they say, right? When you love what you do, you're not working a day in your life. So it's a hard thing to kind of stop and just put away.
Yeah. Now, do you find yourself challenged to find that balance of rest, right? Because you're obviously you're doing a lot of different things, right? And you've got you're juggling a lot of different things in the air. Is that a challenge for you, finding that time to just kind of relax and recharge?
Absolutely, absolutely. I think I posted about this on LinkedIn. I don't know if you recall, maybe 2 weeks ago or so, because I have been, after the holidays, and we had like a launch with this. I sit on a board for this tribe called Ubuntu Tribe, which is a gold backed token. And so we did our launch in March. And so ever since beginning of this year, all the way through March and actually today, I've just been hitting it hard, traveling from the Philippines to the Maldives to London to Belgium, back to Dubai twice, Egypt, you name it. And I just realized it's like, I've always been like, oh, I need to find balance. I need to do self-care. I need to do this because, as a single mother, my daughter is now here in New York, for her first year in college. I have my two boys in the Bay Area still. My parents are still there. I have my team in the Philippines. And so I shuttle back and forth and try to be a mother, a daughter, a friend, a CEO for both. And, so it gets overwhelming. So I think it's just understanding that there's no perfect life. There is no such thing as a balance. You just choose what resonates most with you, what your priorities. That's just all about priorities. But it's give and take. You can't have everything. So yes, I'm not, with my children enough. But there's a part of me that knows I've raised my children on my own to a level where I've raised them to become independent and confident and know and feel secure that even though I'm traveling the world, they know that there's a purpose that I'm serving, and that they will always have me. Right. My mom is the same way. I'm very close, being the firstborn. She's the type that would like call me every day. And if she doesn't hear from me, she'll call 911, but now she's learned to understand that I've taken on this mission and that my life is partly dedicated to this part. And so, there are hard days. Actually, there's a lot. Traveling alone is very lonely. This is a side of a lot of women because we're always so, focused on trying to show strength and that we can handle it all. And then we're great multitaskers. And, this is another thing that I've raised during one of my speeches for women in tech is that, there is a certain level of peace and power affixed to showing reality and showing vulnerability as a woman. There are days where I am exhausted and I find myself in a hotel room by myself and crying myself to sleep because I'm lonely. I miss my children. I wish I could be there for them every day. I think about my parents, especially during COVID, the risk of, having somebody like me who travels often and the risk of infecting them. The frustration of feeling like I also want to be with my team in the Philippines, even though we're remote, because I only get to see them at least, twice or three times a year during the pandemic. And I wish it could be more because, I think we really do work well together whenever we're together. So, there's really no level of balance anybody or a standard to balance. Everybody just has to take, what their priorities is and have a lot of gratitude. That's usually what helps me, especially I've had probably one of the most challenging last 3 days in my entire career. The last 3 days, just one of those days where it just rains and pours, it's like, oh, it's not enough that this thing is not working and this and this. Oh, and by the way, let me just give you a flu, and feeling like I'm running this by myself. And there was a humbling message I got on LinkedIn. I was sharing this with one of my partners. And at the end of the day, I cried myself to sleep, not because I felt overwhelmed by the challenges, but I felt so humbled. In times where, especially as a woman, where you've kind of been placed on this pedestal as you have to make it work because society expects you to make it work. Otherwise, you're a failed individual, right? That's kind of ingrained into us. I'm crying about the challenges that I have. And then yet I get this message come across me from LinkedIn. And it just humbled me to realize there are so many more women who are going through far more. And so, you know what? You need to shake it off, wipe those tears, because you know what? you're meant you're meant to be here. You could be worse. We have a war going on in Ukraine, and there's so many women and children. I can't even imagine, what they're going through right now, right? A lot of women in Africa who don't know when, where they'll get the next meal from. And so I'm like, what are you crying about? You dedicated yourself for a mission, and you should be so honored to be in the place that you're in to have these challenges, because you bring forth so much inspiration to so many women. What an honor to have that, responsibility. So yeah, I was just crying. I'm like, thank you, Source, for reminding me, you know what gratitude and how gratitude just changes one's perspective, and set me back on the course, and focus on what needs to happen, and feel good at the same time about it, doing it. So
I think that's an amazing perspective that you have. And you're right. There is no perfect life, right? And everything that we do it's like this giant series of trade-offs. Like, yes, I want to be more successful at this, and that means I need to spend maybe a little less time with my family, and I want to spend time with my family, but I also, want to provide for my family, and I want to do this and I want to do that. And, we just have to navigate, like, where are we willing to make trade-offs, because we're going to have to make trade-offs. Like, you're just going to have to live, and you're going to make decisions, and those decisions may have consequences that have both good and bad sides to them. And I love that you've given yourself the permission to go out and do things that are difficult. They're hard to do, and they're, as you mentioned earlier, I think they're doubly hard to do as a woman because of some of the expectations that society has for, particularly for mothers, right?
absolutely.
So thank you so much for sharing that. I find your story really inspirational, and I know that you you are battling out there to make things better for people. And I think that's the thing that I really love, is that you really are driven by helping other people.
Yeah, yeah. And in hopes of inspiring others, like, look, there's a way for us to profit. There's a way for us to create a business that actually still gives back, right? Provides
Yeah.
impact. And what a more fulfilling way to accomplish something, versus just, oh, I raised so and so much money, oh, I'm profiting so and so, or we're growing by this much, and like that. But versus, how many lives of women we've changed, and provided opportunities for that struggling high school graduate who can't even afford to go to college, and provide free training for them so they can have a chance at a decent job, to help uplift the lives of their families. That's the legacy I want my children to think about, that I've left them. And even for the Philippines, because I always ask my children, like, oh, any of you want to intern for me or take over? And they look, I don't even think I want to do what you're doing, And so I revert back to my team in the Philippines, and I say, look, one day I'm going to be gone, and you guys are going to have to uphold and pass on this baton. And so, knowing that I've set forth and started that, and it's something that I'm committed to, like, seeing through till my last days, actually. I want this to get passed over, handed over from generations to come. It's it's quite a fulfilling thing.
I think this has been the most inspiring episode of Next in Queue to date, and I can't tell you how much I appreciate you taking the time. I know that you're not feeling well, and your voice is not all that it can be. But I told you this morning, I'm like, your personality is going to shine through whether your voice is fully up to it or not. And I know that has happened today. So thank you so much.
I am honored. No, thank you. You have been nothing but wonderful, supportive, and super patient with the whole, rescheduling with the travel and everything, and now being sick. You have been the most gracious and what do you call this, supportive friend that I have on LinkedIn. And, I wish you well. Provide this level of energy that every time I hop on a Zoom with you, it just, big smile on my face and it feels so good. Thank you so much, Rob. And if there's anything I can do on my end to support you and your efforts and your content, you always have a friend here.
Yeah, I really appreciate that. And we will absolutely stay in touch.
Awesome.
And hey, get better.
Thank you.
And I wish you continued success. And I can't wait to chat with you again.
All right. Same with me. Thank you. Take care. Enjoy the rest of your week.
Bye, Marion.